Inside each of us lies an astonishing power. A power so elemental, so vital, the world depends on it, thrives on it. That power is human potential. The ability to create vibrant futures. It's a student's potential to become a leader, an inventor, a healer. The researcher's potential to cure cancer, to forge new discoveries, to create a sustainable world. It's her potential to reduce hunger, his determination to build a stronger workforce, and their power to lift the human spirit and make it soar. When we invest in people, we invest in the belief that, together, we can change lives and move communities forward. Ohio State has always championed people and their potential. Here, brilliance and compassion intertwine. Hearts and minds connect to create lasting, positive change. With courage and optimism, we confront the complexities of today and the unknowns of tomorrow. Through time and change, we continually advocate for those who improve our world. Whiteboards and computers, they don't transform students into leaders. The people who use them do. Buildings of metal and glass don't make dynamic discoveries. The people inside of them do. Paths of brick and stone don't build stronger communities. The people who travel them do. You do. We do. Human potential is the world's greatest resource. And when we work together to champion this potential, anything is possible. Together, we are champions for students, researchers, artists, visionaries, and communities. Together, we are champions for all. And together, we move forward.
Hello, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences to the CFAES Time and Change Alumni Webinar Series. I'm Amy Jo Bachman, and I serve as the Director of Alumni Engagement and Annual Giving for CFAES. Before we begin the webinar, I would like to share just a couple housekeeping items. First of all microphones have been muted and videos are turned off. This session is being recorded and it will be shared after today's webinar. If you would like to pose questions to our panelists today, please use the Q&A feature. It's located in the bottom toolbar of your screen to submit questions throughout the webinar. CFAES is a cornerstone college of The Ohio State University. And as you learned from the video, human potential is the most valuable resource that we possess. CFAES is proud of our alumni and the great work that they do to lead food, agricultural, and environmental industries. I am thrilled to introduce an outstanding alumna and the moderator of our alumni panel today. Dr. Annie Specht is an associate professor of agricultural communication in the Department of Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership at The Ohio State University. She teaches courses in publication production and design, feature writing, and data visualization. Her research interests include popular media portrayals of agriculture, public perceptions of food and fiber issues, and visual communication. Dr. Specht is a two-time alumna of the College of Food, Agricultural, and Environmental Sciences, receiving a Bachelor of Science degree in Agriculture and a Master of Science degree in Agricultural and Extension Education. Thanks for moderating our panel today, Dr. Specht.
Thanks, Amy Jo. As both an alumna and a donor to CFAES, it is absolutely a pleasure to be here. Welcome everyone to the first in the CFAES Time and Change Alumni webinar series. Today we're going to be discussing the food supply chain with three exceptional CFAES alumni. First, I'd like to introduce Kurt Loudenback. Mr. Loudenback was born and raised on a family dairy farm in central Ohio. He studied agricultural economics at Ohio State and earned his Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture in 1983. He began his career at Purina Mills later in 1983, and throughout his time, he served as the district manager, the division sales manager, the regional general manager, and director of the swine business group. In 2001, he became president of Ellison Meat Company in Pipestone, Minnesota. In 2003, Kurt co-founded Grand Prairie Foods in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and since then he has served as both president and CEO. Mr. Loudenback has been married to his wife Valerie for 36 years, and together they have 3 children, Daniel, Andrea, and Grant. Mr. Loudenback is engaged in many civic activities, including more than 20 years of coaching youth basketball and baseball, and he is a charter member of Spirit of Peace United Church of Christ. He serves as on the board of directors for Downtown Sioux Falls Rotary, Sioux Falls Development Foundation, and the Zeal Center for Entrepreneurialism. Thanks for joining us today, Mr. Loudenback.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Our second panelist is Dr. Sally Rockey. Dr. Rockey became the inaugural executive director of the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research in 2015. Prior to this role, Dr. Rockey was a leader in federal research, overseeing the operations of the extramural programs in both agriculture and biomedicine. She spent almost 20 years with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where she held several positions within the Cooperative State Research, Education, and Extension Service, including the head of competitive research grants and the chief information officer. From there, she spent 11 years with the National Institutes of Health as the Deputy Director for Extramural Research, where she led the operations of the world's largest extramural research program. Returning to her roots in agriculture, she has seen FFAR through its startup phase and witnessed it grow into a significant force in the agriculture research community through the development of innovative private and public research partnerships. Dr. Rockey received her PhD in entomology from Ohio State and did postgraduate work at the University of Wisconsin. She has devoted her career to improving people's lives through research and continues this mission today. Dr. Rockey, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Wonderful to be here.
Our third panelist is J. Michael Townsley, and he is the chairman of Bob Evans Farms Post-Refrigerated Retail. Bob Evans Farms is the leading producer and distributor of refrigerated potato, pasta, and vegetable-based side dishes, pork sausage, and a variety of refrigerated and frozen convenience food, including the Bob Evans, Owens, and Pineland Farms brands. Before advancing to the chairman position, Mr. Townsley ran Bob Evans Farms as president and CEO. As chairman, Mr. Townsley is focused on the strategic direction of the company, developing acquisition opportunities in the ever-changing food industry environment, strengthening retailer relationships, and continuing charitable and community outreach for Bob Evans. Prior to joining Bob Evans Farms Incorporated, Mr. Townsley was Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Premium Standard Farms in Kansas City, which was the largest fully integrated pork company in the country. His prior experience includes 3 years at Smithfield Foods of Smithfield, Virginia, and 11 years with IBP Incorporated of Dakota City, Nebraska. Mr. Townsley attended The Ohio State University and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in agriculture and has dedicated his professional career to the improvement of the meat industry as well as animal agriculture. So thanks for being with us today, Mr. Townsley, and welcome to all of our panelists.
It's great to be with you.
So as we begin our conversation with these 3 alumni leaders, please feel free to submit any questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. We're going to do our best to try to get to everyone's questions, but we may not be able to get to all of them before our 3 p.m. deadline. So we are going to go ahead and begin with a question to all 3 of our panelists. And that question is, what were some of your favorite activities that you were involved in during your time in CFAES?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. So I was actually started my career at Ohio State as a dairy science major before switching over to an ag econ department. And so because of my initial experience with the dairy science department, I was a 4-year member of the Buckeye Dairy Club and served as an officer there. Was an active member of Alpha Gamma Sigma fraternity and served in several offices there. Participated in what was at the time was known as CAHENER, which was the College of Agriculture, Home Economics and Natural Resources at the time, and then kind of capped off that effort as the co-chair for the annual awards banquet.
Fantastic. Dr. Rockey, how about you?
Yeah, I actually have 3 degrees from Ohio State. My first was in zoology, and then I have my master's and PhD in entomology. And At the time, we were part of the entomology group down in Columbus, was part of the College of Biological Sciences, and our partners in crime were those up at the experiment station in the Agriculture College. So it was really a wonderful opportunity to have biological sciences and the agricultural school come together. I did a lot of things as a graduate student at the time, since I formed the first graduate student forum for graduate students in entomology to have speakers come and to talk. One of my favorite experiences was between my PhD and a master's and PhD. I was a field scout there in Franklin County when there were still acres and acres of farmland. And that was a really wonderful experience to work directly with farmers and to see the plight of some of the things that were going on there as far as pests and pathogens. So it was a wonderful experience as a whole. I got to know many people, both on the ag side and the biological sciences. So it was a spectacular training that I received.
Fantastic. And Mr. Townsley?
Yeah, all 4 years that I was at Ohio State, I was participant in the Saddle and Sirloin Club, our animal science department club, and ultimately served as president. I was also enjoyed time with the Little International, as well as part of AGS, as Kurt Loudenback said. He and I are both fraternity alumni of Alpha Gamma Sigma. But probably my most rewarding experience was both on the meat evaluation team as well as the livestock judging team. Those 2 years were extremely beneficial in my development and some of the most enjoyable times that I had during my college career.
Fantastic. Thank you all for sharing. And with that, we are going to dive right into sort of the big overarching question that we are trying to answer today. And this is all for all three of our panelists. So thinking about your professional experiences, how has the food supply chain changed in the last 20 to 30 years? And what do you foresee happening in the next 20 to 30 years?
I guess I can start
Sure.
if you'd like. To me, the most overwhelming big picture thing that we've seen is the consolidation on both the food manufacturing side, the meat production side, as well as the producer side, where there are less small producers. They've consolidated to large producers. And so it's changed a lot of the dynamics within the industry. I was talking with a colleague in the industry yesterday, and we were talking about the hog cycle. And the hog cycle that we used to have 30 years ago, 40 years ago, was a traditional 3-year hog cycle where a lot of producers would get in business when economics were good. They would quickly get out when economics were bad, and it pretty much went in a 3-year period. Now that we have large producers that are very well capitalized, they're longer to get in and longer to get out. And so some of those times of the downturn tend to be more painful because you don't have those people. They've got a lot of capital invested and they're reluctant to get out of the business at that point in time. So that's how really I've seen it change over the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Just to piggyback on that, no pun intended, Mike, I would prefer that, obviously consolidation has been a big movement in the industry across all species. But at the same time, we're seeing a increasing demand by consumers that want to know where their food's coming from. They want to see stories behind the food, and they want labels that they can understand. And so I think that has really significantly evolved, especially in the last 10 years. And if you ask about, what might happen in the next 20 to 30 years, I think that will become an increasingly important part of the food supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say from the part of science, this is really a unique time where we're seeing this great convergence of technological advances with what we know about plants and animals and economic systems. And when those things come together, we get a real acceleration of science. And we've seen technology applied to agriculture and the food system more than ever before. And so in the last 20 or 30 years, there's been such great advancements in robotics and GPS and gene editing, big data, that all have been able to be applied readily in agriculture. So it's such an exciting time to be in agriculture. And I would say that we're going to see that even accelerate in the next 30 years. I think there'll be also a big shift because of environmental concerns and because of advances that we have from just shifting from maximizing yield and production into maximizing profitability. I think that's going to be a real piece of what we're going to do on the farm level. But this real advancement in technology has really impacted agriculture like no other sector, and it's happening faster and faster.
Sure. So, Mr. Townsley, what impact has COVID-19 had on the food supply chain, and what can we as a college and extension service do to help mitigate some of that impact?
What we have seen in the meat industry has probably been as front and center, unfortunately, as any food industry has been during COVID-19 pandemic. Due to the nature of the work that we do in our manufacturing plants, people are in close proximity to each other, more or less working shoulder to shoulder. And what has forced us to do is space people out, build plexiglass to separate workstations. Even at times we've had to slow the line down so we could create more space. Unfortunately, during this time where we actually had where we had to take plants offline for periods of time, this is a pipeline where producers are producing animals that are expected to come for processing, and when they can't come for processing, we were having issues on farm with potential euthanasia of livestock on farm because there was really nowhere to take those animals to be processed. We even had plants to the point where they were able to bring in enough workers that they could slaughter and just more or less load those animals onto a truck to head to rendering. So it's had a very impactful effect on the meat industry. I think that now that we're through this initial part of this, we've learned a lot more. Most of our plants are back online. We've put in a lot of precautions inside the plants. We're doing contact tracing more or less inside our plants. So if someone tests positive, workers are notified around them of who they came in contact with so they can take the appropriate steps. So we're much better today as an industry than we were prior to.
Mm-hmm. And that actually provides a perfect lead-in for our next question to Dr. Rockey, which is that, COVID-19 has brought existing issues within the food system to the forefront. And how do you think the labor issues that have become visible, some of which Mr. Townsley just mentioned, especially in the meat and poultry processing sector, intersect with some of the other issues we're hearing about currently with race and social justice that are now being more widely discussed?
Right. So I think Mike just presented some of the issues, but I think COVID has brought to the forefront that we all recognize that there's critical social and economic and public health roles that the food supply chain is played by the food supply chain, and everyone is responsible for this: the workers, the managers, the business owners, the firms, everyone, to make it function correctly. But there's inequalities that are across our food system that are more apparent under COVID. And as Mike just mentioned, the workers can be at risk, especially workers that work closely together. And they might also, because they are from vulnerable populations or from immigrant populations, they may lack some of the same health benefits that others get. And yet they're oftentimes the ones that are taking risks to ensure that food is available. So there's really what I would call a racial justice paradox in this, that people of color or Black and brown people are most likely to lose their jobs in a crisis like here in COVID. And they also can suffer food and housing insecurity, and yet they're more likely to be the ones to be asked to keep working and have their jobs in contact with other people. So we have this paradox here. So I think it's really responsible it's a responsibility, as Mike had indicated, and the good things that have happened as a result of this to recognize what the potential vulnerabilities are. At the same time, we have to think about the United States has the highest rate of food insecurity among wealthy countries, and there's unequal access to food along income, race, ethnic disability, age, and gender. And when you layer COVID on top of that, which in and of itself has racial disparities and the incidence and severity of COVID, much of it has to do with the comorbidities that are associated with food. So that are grounded in the food system. For example, diabetes and obesity are two of the principal COVID risk association factors. So, and on top of that, we have really, during the COVID crisis here, we have relied a lot on the private charitable feeding systems, such as Feeding America, to do all they can. But I think it sheds light on the fact that we need to have a strong nationwide commitment, but on the part of the private sector, government, philanthropic organizations, and the entire ag system to strengthen what we can do for the community, including building infrastructure, as some of the changes that Mike had expressed, to the processes and the policies that really give us all deeply grounded principles of equity and justice. And that will require us all to look at this complexity of the food system, including all that social and economic and biophysical processing that operate at many scales. So it really does bring this to light in our turbulent times about racial inequalities, but also about racial justice.
Right. I know that there's a lot of research currently ongoing at the in the college and at the university around these issues. So, you know, we appreciate hearing a little bit more from the research side of that. And Mr. Loudenback, the next question is for you. And this one sort of, you alluded to this a little bit earlier in one of your responses. Obviously, the pandemic has created a lot of challenges, but with those challenges come potential opportunities. So are there any long-term changes that you think we'll see in the food supply chain due to the pandemic? And are there any changes that you foresee happening in your own organization?
Sure, that's a really good question. You know, I think the the current pandemic situation drove home to us the importance of diversity. And you know, it's well known that the food service world pretty well ground to a halt during the pandemic, as restaurants and hotels and convention centers and cruise lines, they just totally shut down, most of them within a week or two. And so companies that were, you know, pretty well focused on serving those industries have been, you know, severely impacted, and some may not recover from that if they're too heavily involved in that. So in our case specifically, we're a significant supplier to the hospitality industry, and our customers closed down within 1 week. And so it's been a pretty tough impact on our business. But, you know, fortunately, a few years ago, we started investment in the capabilities and the personnel to diversify into consumer packaged goods. And, you know, so while our food service business is suffering during the pandemic, you know, we're experiencing significant growth in the packaged goods side of the business. So that's been important. And so diversity of product offering is really key. So I see a couple of ongoing impacts of this. One is, I think companies will continue to diversify to spread their risk and mitigate the risk of being involved in one channel or one product, or, you know, being too narrowly focused. And then I think also customers. When I think of customers, I'm thinking of mainly in the food service arena. I think they're going to demand food solutions that are going to allow their clients and guests to enjoy the eating experience while being protected from each other. I don't know if we'll ever see in many hotels the bringing back the hot breakfast buffet, because that's just one of those great risk factors that they're going to want to solve. And we're working with our customers to make sure we're providing solutions to help them offer a safe way of their guests to enjoy breakfast. The other, I'm sorry, I was just one other comment. Another change I think it's going to drive is on the supply side, and Mike referred to the disruption that the industry saw within the meat processing and harvesting industry, and that, you know, that has an effect downstream to companies like us that are buying products from those processors. And so making sure that we have a supply chain that allows us diversity of supply is going to be an important part of the future as well. And I think that's going to be true with many companies in the food business. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So, Mr. Townsley, our next question was submitted by Dr. Ratan Lal, who is the CFAES Distinguished Faculty Member and the winner of the 2020 Food Prize, World Food Prize, excuse me. So this is coming from someone of very high esteem here in the CFAES community. There are 1.7 million Ohioans who are food insecure, of which 500,000 are children. How can we achieve zero hunger in Ohio, and how can we strengthen and enhance the resilience of our local food sources?
Well, I think that one of the things that we have to understand is where we talk about these food deserts, where we have populations that are not in close proximity to grocery stores or sources of food. And this compounds itself in a manner of, if they don't have a traditional grocery store to go to, they're reliant either on like fast food or food from a convenience store that may not have the same health benefits of fresh food they could vegetables, fresh fruit and vegetables they could get at a grocery store. So that's a real challenge as we think about our retail partners in the industry and how we look at the food distribution system to get to those populations. There is an opportunity, you know, food disparity as Dr. Rockey described that we have in our country. However, we produce probably more food production than any other country in the world. So there is a bit of a disconnect in that. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders of the industry to figure out how to solve that. So it becomes a challenge, but I think it's going to take the entire food chain system, all the way from producers all the way through to your grocers. They're going to have to work towards solving that.
Sure. And the comments about resilience lead us into our next question, which is for Dr. Rockey. We've heard the term resilience food system come up a lot. And what does that term mean for you and for your organization?
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. We, our organization at the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, work a lot on different aspects of science and research that can help help the whole food supply become more resilient. So really, when you think about resilience, if you think about it in agriculture and in farming, it's really equipping farmers so that they're able to absorb from shocks to the system, right? Shocks and stresses to their system. Some shocks are long-term, some shocks are short-term, some are sudden, and others are, you know, more predictable. And this can severely erode a farmer's ability to farm. And the entire food system can be subject to these disruptions and crises as we're seeing now. And they can be natural or man-made, and they cause considerable damage to allow the, you know, people to have access to safe and affordable food. So we really have to build a more resilient food system. But if you think about the last 2 years, even before COVID, the last 2 years have been some of the most trying times for agriculture, and ag profitability was at least on-farm profitability was at an all-time low even before COVID. Because think of what had happened in the last 2 years. We had the floods. Much of the Midwest was flooded. We have had the trade issues and the trade wars, if you want to call it. And then on top of all of that, we have COVID. So if you really want to test the resilience of a system, this is the time you're going to have to do it. So some of the things that we think about in funding science is, of course, there's things that we think can help make a system more resilient. First of all, we need science and technology. Above all, that's going to help us. We need to be prepared. So preparedness is one of the issues that we've learned a lot about COVID. We need to become agile and a flexible system, and we all need to work together. So if you think about what some of these, how we can withstand and recover from crisis, let's talk about environmental. So in the case of floods, or if we have a drought, you know, if we can use gene editing and others to create crops and varieties that are either fast growing so that if we lose a crop to a flood, we can put in another crop. We can make plants and animals more resistant to drought, et cetera. With trade, we can work on diversification of farms and the types of crops and animal production and livestock production that goes on. There is, as I said, there's going to be a lot of movement towards adding value to what farmers do, particularly ecosystem services, especially in small and mid-sized farms where farmers can get as much value off their land by doing many things, including protecting water and water quality and water quantity and sequestering carbon, all those ecosystem services. As we heard with COVID, there's a lot of things in the example of COVID where we can learn about the entire supply chain. We might need to add more automation to the meat packing and the processing side of it. We can let big data help us so that we can have shorter supply chains and have less just-in-time buying, which we had such an efficient system that most grocers did just-in-time buying, but that has to change. And then finally, we need to really think about a food distribution that's more agile and traceable and personalized. So if we can use things like blockchain, tracing, marrying inventory with global and local inventories and making shorter, more local food chains. And then the last thing I'd like to say is in preparation, when you think about preparation, one thing we predict is that the next thing that's going to hit will be in the zoonotics area and probably an animal disease, a livestock disease. And so we don't know that much about zoonotics, which means the transfer between animals and humans of disease. We need to have a lot more base information and do a lot more work in the zoonotics area. So all of you out there in vet school or in the animal science divisions, along with the medical schools, it's time to really meet up together and get more baseline information on zoonotics.
Absolutely, and that's something that FFAR can help you do, I'm sure.
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. The next question is from Mr. Loudenback, and this comes to us from an alumnus. With the increased interest in consumer choice for organic products, what are some current innovations in the works to increase supply, whether referring to packaged or raw products?
So I may not answer this question directly.
Okay.
I think it really speaks to something broader than that. And the economist in me wants to answer by saying that, food supply is driven by food demand. As I said earlier, consumers are better educated and they're increasingly demanding of their food production system to supply products that appeal to their belief systems, whether that be organic or just simply clean label, or the latest emerging trend is plant-based. And so as the demand for more transparency in food products grows, then the supply chain is going to have to respond with more and better products, and whether it's organic or plant-based. So then as the supply grows, costs go down, making them more affordable and more people can buy them, and the cycle goes on. And really, I think that's what has to happen with organic as well as some of these others, specialty food subsets, is that we need more demand to drive costs down upstream so that it make them more affordable for more people. So our role, though, as a food producer is to respond to the trends, create products that are, the discerning customers can enjoy. And in our case, our focus is on taking products that we produce every day, that may be a breakfast sandwich or a calzone or a stuffed biscuit for Bob Evans, and create them as an organic option to those items. So you're really talking about more mainstream items that people enjoy every day, but amping things up a little bit in terms of the organic aspect or whatever the quality attribute may be that customers demand, but still be a little bit mainstream so that more people can enjoy them.
Sure. So before we move on to some of the questions that have been fielded from the audience, and just a reminder that if you do have a question for our panelists, please utilize the Q&A feature here in the webinar controls. We're going to talk a little bit about their experiences in CFAES. So our next question is for Mr. Townsley. Why do you find it important as an alumnus to support CFAES?
Well, I think there's no better way to develop our next generation of leaders for the food and agriculture industry than places like CFAES. I'll take it back specifically to our industry, the meat industry, to where I really break the challenges we have down into three categories. And one, it's making young professionals coming out of places like Ohio State aware of the opportunities within our industry, because we are not a real, if you will, sexy industry people think about, but there are tremendous opportunities. It's been a wonderful career for myself, and there's a lot of, it's integrally involved in all parts of agriculture as it relates to livestock, grain, all the way through the meat processing. Two, we don't have enough in our industry, and I think this is consistent with many other food manufacturing industries, the technical, our plants are much different today than they were, say, 50 years ago. A lot of automation, we're managing a lot of computers. So the technical skills that we need to run our manufacturing facilities today aren't readily available in the labor force. And so working to develop cooperative relationships with different institutions, trade schools, to develop those skill sets is important. And then obviously just the labor, the pure labor force that we are looking for in our industry to do the work. So consequently, we're focused a lot on automation to figure out how we get labor out of our plants. That helps us in two ways. One, it's hard, tedious work, and so hopefully it makes a better work experience for the worker, as well as we've seen in our current situation, health issues that are people in close proximity to each other. So myself personally, and we at Bob Evans have had a strong desire and have supported the college in a significant way, because it's we think it's the right thing to do, but two, we think of no better way than develop leaders in our industry than through this method.
Fantastic. The next question is for Dr. Rockey. You had a slightly different experience coming into CFAES as a graduate student versus an undergraduate. And so I'm really curious, how was your time as an entomology master's and PhD student impactful for you in your career?
Well, it's everything about my career. In fact, it's both everything about my career and my personal life as well, as I met my husband in graduate school. And so my son would probably give a lot of credit to the ag college. You know, my first job was in entomology, running entomology programs for the USDA. And I think that experience coupled with what I did between my master's and PhD to get more agriculture experience. And by the way, I was also a member of 4-H. I was a square dancer as I grew up. So I have had a lot of links with agriculture, even though I did not grow up on a farm myself. Really led to the career I had. Now, one might ask, how does an entomologist become the deputy of the National Institutes of Health? But it demonstrated what the skills that you're learning in science can be applicable from agriculture to many other areas. And so, of course, it's been a huge, my career has been highly interesting and successful, but I owe it all, I think, to those experiences that I got at Ohio State. I will want to just reiterate one thing that Mike said. The area of big data, data analytics, AI and deep learning, machine learning, all of those things is absolutely right. We do not have enough people in that area. And that's a focus of our organization, and we're hoping to bolster the number of students as undergraduates or graduate students that have experience in agriculture and in data, and combine those into what we call digital agriculture. That is a real area of need. So if any of you there are working on these areas, we see a great future for increasing the number of people that have experience in agriculture and data together.
Fantastic. Mr. Loudenback, who were the most influential faculty members that you had in agricultural economics? And are there any stories, we're going to limit this to the classroom, your extracurricular life was very full and exciting. Any stories from the classroom that stand out to you?
Well, all those extracurricular activities I'm accused of are lies. So as far as professors, it was, it's hard to pick the best of the best because it was just such a rewarding experience from top to bottom in the College of Agriculture as we knew it then. But, a couple of circumstances come to mind that kind of, I still remember to this day. One of them was in Dr. Carl Zuloff's microeconomic theory class, which I was in over my head, to be honest with you. But there were people in that class that were pretty smart. And one of them I distinctly remember as being very smart and is Gary Schnitke, who many of you probably know now is the esteemed professor of agriculture economics at the University of Illinois. So I knew Gary when he was just a young pup like me, and he just turned out to be a lot smarter than I did. But so I remember Dr. Zuloff's class was pretty interesting. And then another one, I believe my good friend Todd Kranz is on the line watching this, and I can remember back in a dairy science class with Dr. Terry Smith, and he connected us up with this contraption that he called a computer to some sort of phone line and connected with another university somewhere else in the country and called it the internet. And, that was probably 5 years before, internet really became prevalent and available to us as the common folk, so to speak. But I do remember that was about 1980, probably, that we connected with another university from Plum Hall on this contraption called the internet. It was pretty interesting.
So we are getting sort of close to our time to begin our sort of unofficial Q&A period. But I did want to sort of ask all three of you in the next couple of minutes. So thinking about the next generation of food system leaders, we've talked about how CFAES can help develop these, the areas that we need to fill. What is one thing that CFAES graduates should understand about the food system? And what advice would you give them for helping them build a more resilient food supply chain?
So, should I go ahead?
Yes, please do.
I would just say that the food system is large and complex. I used to work at NIH, and I thought the data in NIH was in biomedicine was large, but when you consider that that's about one animal, the human, and here in agriculture about the sky, the earth, animals, plants, people, economics, etc. So it's a very large, complex system. And in order to make change and to be on the verge of making an even stronger agricultural system, we really have to think outside the box. So I always say, if you're going to work in this area, you have to be curious, you have to think outside the box. And I'd like to also say that also work directly with the farmers. Norman Borlaug, who on his deathbed said the words, "Take it to the farmers," that is really something that we have to live by, and that farmers and ranchers have to be involved in everything that we do.
Mm-hmm.
My comment on that would be that, we talked earlier in this webinar about consolidation in the industry, and a couple of things come to mind in terms of opportunities that come with that. One is that larger food companies tend to be better equipped to pay for talent. As Mike said, they're investing in their plants and automation, and that requires a whole new skill set to manage not only the equipment, but that environment in general is becoming more demanding to manage it, because you're managing a system now instead of just a bunch of people on a line. And so there's real opportunity there, I would say, for smart kids with initiative that can become involved in the industry that the college can prepare. On the other end of that spectrum, large companies tend to be slower to respond. They become more conservative in their approach. They're protecting a brand. And so opportunities for creative destruction abound, quite frankly. And innovations, we talked about organic, plant-based, direct meal delivery right to the home. Those didn't come from large food companies. They came from entrepreneurs who saw a need, wasn't being filled, and they embarked on filling a dream. And so I think there are opportunities abound in this industry that we call the food industry that really speaks of a great future for the young kids that are coming out of college.
Great. Mr. Townsley?
Yes, I think that the things that folks need to think about as they think about whether they want to explore a career in the food and agriculture industry is that most people immediately go to, when I say agriculture, they go to production farming or something such as that. As Dr. Rockey said, our industry is so broad and so diverse in the type of food production systems that we have, all the way from basic production agriculture, all the way through food processing, retail food distribution. So I encourage people to go explore, do different things, have as many internships, maybe in different areas, find out what you like, because there is something for everyone in agriculture and food production, because we need many skill sets, and it's not just kind of the production farming that we traditionally used to think of. It's a great opportunity and a wonderful industry.
Well, thank you all so much for answering the questions that we provided for you. So now let's move on to some of the questions provided by our audience. And the first one we've touched on a little bit, which is, what do you see as some of the biggest impacts to the food supply chain driven by COVID, and how can companies proactively plan to protect their supply bases?
Well, in our case, as I alluded earlier, we're creating a catastrophe plan that, if a plant goes down because we have a difficult time staffing it, whether it be from a pandemic impact or weather or whatever else, is just making sure that there's some sort of redundancy of production capacity so we can continue to service our customers. And we're really getting full speed and putting that on the fast track to make sure that we're prepared. Now, we were largely unimpacted by this the current pandemic in terms of our ability to produce, but seeing what was happening in the rest of the industry with some of the larger food processing systems put a little bit of fear into us that we need to be prepared in the event that something could happen that shuts down our system. So I think some sort of redundancy, not necessarily doubling up on your investment in equipment, but creating partnerships with other food processing companies that have similar capabilities is going to be a key part of our strategy to make sure that we can supply our customers with what they want when they want it.
So we had a question about fresh produce, and the question asks, locally grown has been a top trend in fresh produce. However, with COVID, the supply chains with locally sourced supplies have thrived. Do you see decentralized supply chains regaining any strength in the future?
Yeah, I think I can just answer real quickly, but I think it'd probably be better for Kurt or Mark to answer this. But I think that we're demonstrating more supply chains. Supply chains are getting shorter, but I think in the case of a crisis situation like we had in COVID, we're going to have to really examine that, because there are going to be things that are left out with short supply chains. So, in fruits and vegetables, for example, with fruits and vegetables, where 65% of them are imported from outside the country, then we have to really think about what a local supply chain will provide us as opposed to what we're accustomed to. But I do believe that supply chains will become more distributed as time goes on.
Sure.
It's a difficult dilemma, because at the same time we talk about diversifying the supply chain so that we have multiple sources of materials to build food with. The regulatory environment is becoming increasingly difficult from the standpoint that once you have a fixed label that has certain ingredient statement on it, and ingredient statements today are specific to a material, it's tough to shift and substitute materials with other alternatives on short notice because the regulatory environment just isn't conducive to allowing that. So it's a great question. It's one that we all have to wrestle with, and as I said earlier, it's on our radar to put more attention into that, but it's a difficult issue to resolve.
I'll just chime in on this. I think it's going to make us better from a production system as we think about our manufacturing plants, as we think about our associates. How do we take better care of them, provide a better environment for them? because we need to be able to keep our plants running in order to get food into the distribution system. That really wasn't something that we, so to speak, contemplated before of being a real issue. And with this pandemic, it's really brought that to the forefront.
Absolutely. So our next question is, do you think we will see another green revolution take place in the next 20 to 30 years?
Oh, yeah. And I call it the Green Revolution 2.0. I mean, if you think about the first Green Revolution, it was really about superior genetics and the use of chemicals to help us provide as much nutrient to the plants to increase yield and increase production across the world. So the second generation, the Green Revolution 2.0, which is going on now, will have as a centerpiece, I guess this is a shout out to Dr. Lal, about the soil and about doing more with less. That's really what it's going to be about. So it's going to be understanding how we and the entire biological world that is part of our agricultural system can work in harmony, and also how we're going to think about agriculture as a solution to climate change instead of part of the issues of climate change. We truly believe that agriculture can be a centerpiece for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, probably more than any other sector. So we're going to have to try to rethink our entire world, but I do think the second green revolution is already ongoing.
Sure.
I think others might call it regenerative agriculture. My daughter's actually in a master's program at Colorado State in that, and that's what the focus is. And that's kind of exciting to me that there's a younger generation that is really focused on regeneration of nutrients and what's generated on the farm that gets recycled back to into the soil, and really less reliance on outside inputs to provide the crop and other support for livestock systems.
To add on to Dr. Rockey's comments, we are going to have to find ways to more efficiently produce food for the world. If you look at statistics over the next 30 years, what world population is going to do, I don't know that it's 100% increase, but it's close to that by 2050. And with that, we've got to feed the world. We're not going to have a lot more land, so we've got to do it more efficiently. But to add on to that, we've got to do it in a manner that's environmentally friendly. Mm-hmm. And whether it be carbon sequestration, the soil, regenerative agriculture, as Kurt alluded to, it's interesting. We have been doing a fair amount of consumer research very recently through the pandemic here, and say, okay, is this still something that people have interest in in the middle of this pandemic when they've been distracted with other things? And our research shows more than ever, people are more concerned about the environment, sustainability, and products that help move us in a direction that is more sustainable. So I think it's on the forefront. I think, to Dr. Rockey's point, we are going to see a second green revolution, and it's going to be in this manner versus what we saw with fertilizers and pesticides from 50 years ago.
Sure.
And I'd just like to mention one other thing. What's really critical about this Green Revolution 2.0 is that we reach the entire planet. So I think there was a question about Asia and Africa. That is really going to be important, that the beneficiaries of the Green Revolution are across the entire planet and reach every continent and every country.
Absolutely. And I think this might be our last question, and that is, given the shifting consumer demand, what do you think is the future for that smaller family farm, or for that smallholder farm in Africa, Latin America, and Asia?
Well, I think that there's a lot of opportunity. Our program right now, within our foundation, we are starting a program called Harvest for Health, which is to really look at how food companies, what kind of nutrients they're looking for to promote healthy eating, and how we can find those more easily and sort of proactively across the planet. So I think there's going to be more opportunity as people are looking for more nutritional choices, that some of them are going to be plants and animals that are only grown in other countries. And so I think there's great opportunity in Asian markets, and I mean for Asian farmers as well as smallholder farmers in Africa. We've already seen that some of these examples, like what happened with quinoa, which was in South America and became a huge favorite here in the United States, so much so that the prices of the product went up so high that some of the farmers' own families couldn't afford to eat the quinoa. But nonetheless, we're going to see this changing consumer demand I think is much more diverse and looking for new alternatives.
Any follow-up, Mr. Loudenback or Mr. Townsley?
No, that was well said. I don't have anything to add.
Okay.
No, I think she's exactly right on. I think is an opportunity for American agriculture. How do we take our technology that we've developed and transpose that into those other countries to allow them to produce food on an efficient basis?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Mr. Townsley, because one of the things that we have to think about with every new technology is scalability, right? So what might work on a large farm, is it going to work on even small and mid-sized farms here in the United States, as well as with smallholder farmers across Asia and Africa? So scalability is a critical issue when dealing with smallholder and smaller farmers, both here and abroad.
All right. So with that, we will wrap up our first webinar in the CFAES Time and Change Alumni Series. And I would like to thank Mr. Townsley, Dr. Rockey, and Mr. Loudenback for serving on our panel today and sharing their expertise with us. So once this webinar concludes, you will be asked to take a survey. Please provide feedback about your experience today so that we can make sure to improve your future webinar experience. You will receive a follow-up message with the recording of today's session as well. And just a quick reminder that nominations are now open for the 2021 CFAES Career or Alumni Awards. So please be sure to nominate an exceptional alum by June 30th. Registration is now open for the next webinar in our series, which will be on Thursday, July 16th from 2 to 3 p.m. and will feature another outstanding CFAES alumni panel. So I want to thank you again. Thanks again to our panelists for joining us today. We hope to see you at our next webinar. And until then, stay safe and go Bucks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.